that's
Yeah.
one that's a little bit different.
Hey, have you ever heard somebody use this phrase, my life has been a living hell, or I have gone through hell? Well, if you've ever heard somebody use that language, Gregory is going to tell you he lived through 4 minutes in hell. But if there's a guy whose life has been through all of it, and I'm talking abuse and drugs and every imaginable or unimaginable problem, Jack's been through it, and he's figured out a way to not only survive it, but to thrive it. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm just going to go ahead and clear the way for you to listen to my guest, Jack Gregory, on this episode of Unbeatable.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey, Jack, thank you for joining me from your garden shed over in the UK for this episode of Unbeatable.
You are very welcome. It's nice to be here.
How you doing, man?
I'm good. It's been a long day, but I'm good.
Well, it's been it's the middle of the afternoon here. Is middle of the afternoon on this side of the Atlantic means long day for you guys on that side of the Atlantic, right?
Yeah, it's just gone 6 p.m.
You got a pretty amazing background. We're going to talk about some of the Hollywood movies that are, that you've been involved in. But I cannot miss this. For anybody who's watching this on YouTube, they cannot miss this wall of movies behind you and some pretty amazing titles on those VHS tapes. Yes, you heard me right. VHS tapes, old school VHS tapes from the 70s and 80s and 90s behind you.
Yeah, I've got some. The thing about VHS is that before they move from medium to medium, they only move 75%, if that, of titles. So when it moved from VHS to DVD, they only moved about 65-70% of titles, and a lot of them got what's called deleted. So a lot of these are deleted, or they only ever made it to rental at Blockbuster.
You got your own version of Blockbuster going on right behind you, is what I hear you saying.
I have.
I like your style, Jack. Hey, man, you're helping a lot of people. You're creating a space. In fact, we'll talk about your podcast, Live and Undrugged, in just a few moments. But you're creating a space where people that have been through what you've been through can just open up and be real and be honest about it. Let's try to get to the point that you got healthy, you got clean, and now you're starting to help other guys and gals, find the, getting healthy and getting clean. Let's make our way there. But in order to do that, let's go all the way back to childhood. Let's go back to, early childhood when you take your first drugs at 10 years old. Can you describe how this started for you?
Yes, so it goes back a little bit before 10. It goes back to when I was 8, really, I guess. So I was born in Scotland, raised in Yorkshire, God's own county.
God's own county. I love it.
In the north of England. So it's very industrial, and it's a lot of mines. So I grew up in a mining community during the 80s. Now I always felt a bit different. I was always a bit quiet. I was always shy. I was always meek, physically weak as well. And I always felt a little bit different to my family, and I didn't know why. And some of my family would talk behind my back, and some of them would be a bit funny towards me, and I never knew why. And on my 8th birthday, after a day of drinking pop and eating lots of cakes and stuff like that, I remember sitting on my mum's knee, and my dad was, I remember it vividly. He was wearing his jeans and his white vest, as he often did, looking over his glasses, reading the newspaper, and I was sat on my mum's knee, and she said, we love you very much. You are our son, but you weren't.
What? You
Um,
they just kind of blurted it out right after your birthday that you were adopted.
yeah, and I get why I didn't for a long time. Um, so yeah, she said that I was adopted and that they love me very much. Um, and I now know that they had to tell me by my 8th birthday. It only came through. My birthday is in the May, and the adoption only came through in the April, at the end of the April. But I think part of the whole court case was that they had to tell me that I was adopted by the time I was 8, and that I had um, a choice to find my real family. A choice which I didn't use, by the way, for a long, long time because I was scared. Um, but I didn't hear that. What I heard, I guess a lot of normal people, or what we call normal people, would see it as, well, I'm loved by someone. Um, it wasn't for me. It was an existential crisis at 8 years old. And when you go through an existential crisis at 8 years old, when you're growing up during the 80s, um, during a time when, for living up north, there was a lot of austerity because our Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, in her wisdom, decided that it would be cheaper to buy coal from South Africa and France rather than buying it uh, from the mines. Um, and there was some I think around about 1,200 mines, all in all, and a lot closed down. There were a lot of strikes, a lot of union men in our town. Um, my dad was a union man. I grew up around these strong characters, all good speakers. Um, my dad, not so much. He was quite a quiet guy, but quite strong, quite yeah, quite sound. But yeah, all I heard was I wasn't loved by someone, and I had this existential crisis. 8 years old, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And there was no therapy, no way to speak to people about it. There was nobody for me to speak to. Um, the teachers at school really didn't give a monkeys, so because it wasn't their job to deal with that. So all they saw was me acting out and being naughty. And the way that I learned to deal with this was I learned to lie because I thought, well, if I'm not who I thought I was, I can be whoever I want to be. So I started telling these outrageous lies. I mean, absolutely outrageous lies. And it was obvious that they were lies, but I was crying out for help. Yeah, I was crying out for help. Um, and but I didn't know this. Nobody else knew this. They just thought, because I couldn't read or write very well, I was just seen as thick and special because there was no real help for dyslexia. It wasn't really a thing. There was no such thing as neurodiversity. There wasn't that understanding. So I was a neurodivergent kid with this during the 80s with this existential crisis, and I didn't know what to do. So I started playing up, and I always had a good head for making money, whether that be legally or illegally. Um, I would make it at school in later days by running VHS, knockoff VHS.
Look at you.
Um,
You're already in the market when you're still in
yeah,
school. Okay.
I learned very quickly that my family weren't poor. They owned their own house. My dad was a railwayman, so the mines didn't really affect us that
Yeah.
much until British Rail was privatised. But so I got everything that I wanted. I was spoiled. I was absolutely spoiled. I'll admit that. And I was mollycoddled and all that. But and I guess it was because they were trying to make up for something.
Yeah.
Um, but I knew how to pirate VHS. I knew where to get things like pornography and stuff like that, and knock off films. I had a little video camera that I would tape the light, and I would go to the cinema, and I would tape the film, and then I would put that on VHS.
You were the guy with the handheld camera at the cinema that people were watching the bootlegged copies from.
Yes, I
All right.
was, and this was when I was like 14, 15, 16. I was doing that. I was running the odd bit of cannabis for local dealers, and I was doing a milk round and two paper rounds, and I was working in a key cutting shop and a plasterer's shop and stuff like that. So money was a big motivator for me. But I was bullied badly at school, and because I didn't know who I was, I tried to fit in. So I smoked my first joint at the age of 10 behind a school bike shed. Um, yeah, White Lightning, which is like this really strong white cider in a 2 litre bottle, or 2 or 3 litre bottle, and it's absolute rocket fuel, especially for someone so young. But so by the time I was like 14, 15, it was a regular thing. I was smoking dope, I was um, doing a bit of speed mushrooms and things like that. Um, you know,
Jack,
and yeah,
let me jump in for just a second. So you grew up in a mining community, even though your dad worked on the railways. And
yep,
I've been around some mining towns all over the United States. Actually, I've been in some mining communities around the world, and it is a rough life. And
it is.
because it's a rough life, the people that are able to survive in mining communities tend to be some pretty tough people. So I'm just thinking while I'm listening to your story, how tough you had to be, but I'm also thinking about how tough some of those neighborhoods were that you grew up in. Can you describe a little bit about what life was like in a mining town, especially after Margaret Thatcher starts to bring in coal from around the world? And now, not only am I down in the mines, but I'm down, on my luck and can't
Yeah.
even pay the bills.
So it was hard. It was. Now I wasn't sort of physically strong or anything like that, or I didn't think I was. So I was very meek, But it wasn't easy at school. Uh, I remember going to school on the bus that would take some of the miners into work that needed to feed their families, and they were called scabs. And I would never call anybody a scab. I've seen the first-hand damage that it does. So it was this bus, and it had an iron grill on the front window and on the side windows, and that would sometimes take us to school, and it would sometimes drop the miners off. And the thing was, it wasn't just our mining town. Our mining town was surrounded by mining towns. Like the 5 towns in a certain mileage were all mining towns, and because the miners couldn't go to work, because mines were closing down, because there were strikes of the ones that were going on, families started to suffer. Money wasn't coming in. A lot of the towns also doubled as market towns, but because the miners weren't bringing in the money and they were down to singular incomes or no income, then the markets started to fail. And these towns have still never recovered
Yeah.
40 odd years later.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I've been around mining communities around the world. They're all somewhat similar, and life is really, really hard in mining communities, which tends to make people really tough, but it also makes growing up in a community like that really, really hard. So
Mm.
I want the audience to hear, the kind of conditions that you grew up in. That's when everything is going well in the mines. It's hard. When things
Mm.
aren't going well in the mines, or when, the mines are not working, it's brutal.
Yeah, yeah. And there was nothing for kids to do, not really. Um, there were a few local cinemas, but, it was just I guess it's why I've got such an affinity for VHS, because we had video shops. Um, there were 3 video shops in our town. Um, there was one that would let me, when I was 14, he would let Sid's video shop. He would let me get 18s. Um, I guess R-rated, um, above. And I fell into that world of stories. I guess why I've got such an affinity for filmmaking and writing and stuff like that. And I always had a good head for words. I just couldn't get it down on paper. So, and being that kid, growing up in a town like that, and being a bit soft, being a bit weak and meek and mild, I was seen as weird. So I was that weird kid. So I didn't have many friends, if any. Um, so yeah, I mean, it was kind of hard for me. So I tried to fit in, and the way that I did that was being the idiot, being the drinker, being the one that would take drugs, being the one that would laugh at himself taking drugs. I was the one that took a a pot full of magic mushrooms and then tried to hotwire a combine harvester from the field next to the
That sounds
school.
like a recipe for disaster.
It was. It ended up getting me shot with buckshot. Um, but I would do these things because I wanted to fit in so badly, and with my own family, and it never sort of, there were members of my family that never really took me on and kept me at a distance, and that's sad. And I
Yeah.
know that's sad. Um, but to be honest, they didn't really like, even my mum's family weren't big on my mum. They weren't big on our whole family. It was a bit of a weird setup. But that's how it is in Yorkshire. It's supposed to be family orientated. But I always felt like the outsider, the typical black sheep, I guess. And yeah, it led me into a life of brokenness.
Yeah. Hey, I want to be delicate with this part of it, but it is part of your story. Not only did you, grow up in the black sheep part of the family and, you know, in a really rough community, but there was also some sexual abuse in your life. We did
Yes.
a couple of episodes just a few weeks ago of guys that are now using their skills that they learned in the military to try to rescue kids that are being sexually abused. Man, I'm so impressed with their stories, but you were one of those kids,
I
back
was.
in the late 80s. So as as careful as you'd like to be or comfortable as you are with this one, can you just talk a little bit about this part of your story?
Yeah, I will always. This is something that I will always be open about, because I believe that there are men that don't talk about it,
Yeah,
and we need to teach men emotional intelligence. Men need to learn how to be emotionally intelligent.
totally
There are
agree.
so many men that
Yep.
don't know it. There are so many men that they've got all this bravado, and I know why people have this bravado, why they wear these proverbial masks. I understand it all too well. Um, but I guess it's a bit easier now for men to speak up about it, and they are, but it doesn't stop us from ridicule. I get ridicule on a daily basis. I get trolled. So I didn't realize what it was. I thought it was just plain abuse, but it was, I guess, trafficking. You can describe it as. Um, so because I was seen as thick and they called it special. This is back in the days when they used outdated words like retarded. Um, and they said that I was mildly retarded. These were not my words; these were their words. Um, so, not very bright was used a lot as well. So, I was put into the special school system, and it was a school for maladjusted children that was masked as a special school. Um, And as part of that, there were people around within the community that had links with the school. This is before any sort of um, you had to go through any process of going into schools. This was like way before that. Um, and because it was known that I was someone that slow, but I liked drinking, I liked drugs, but I always had a head for knowledge. I was always good at that. I've always I've always been hungry for knowledge and had a good head for words. I guess it's why I was such a good con man for a while. But there were people around, and I was sent. I was caught using drugs, and I was sent to college to on a night time. I was allowed to go to college to do drama because it's what I wanted to do. I always wanted to be an actor. That was always plan A. So they used that as a sort of fishing line to get me in. They also um, there was a guy around, and his name, well, I'll say his first name. His name was Dale, and he was part of the 12-step movement. I'm not going to say which one, but he was part of a 12-step program. But he was the one that took me to my first meeting, and then he was the one that would pass me around, and it was usually men that I would get passed around to, sometimes women, and that really didn't bother me with the women, but the men, it did. I was always told that because I'm a liar and I'm a well-known liar and I'm a documented liar, that
Yeah,
nobody would ever believe me.
it
So
just
why
dawned on me.
bother? So why bother that, and why not reap in some of the rewards? Like, we'll give you a bit of money here and there, and cigarettes and stuff like that. And this happened into my early 20s, to be honest.
Wow.
And I thought because um, I got physically excited that I was gay, which wasn't the case, but I struggled with my sexuality. Um, I struggled mentally um, with my mental health. I think by the time I was 18, I'd already tried taking my own life twice. But I got out of that. I got out of that by moving away. But it was hard, and I couldn't tell anybody. I had no one to speak to. I didn't really have any friends. So what could I do? I'm an addict, and because I'm an addict, drugs are not my problem. Drugs are my solution. And they were my solution. Trauma and disconnection was my problem because I disconnected from my own life. I disconnected from the teachers. I disconnected from my family, and I kept them at a distance for a long time. Um, and I had various times of um, sobriety, but I always had this trauma, so I always ended up falling back.
Yeah, Jack, I thank you for sharing that part of your past, man. I can't imagine for anybody, but a lot of people who are listening to this episode will say, "I don't understand how a male, can be sexually assaulted, how a male can be trafficked." But when you start to explain it, listen, I'm already viewed as different or slow. I'm already sent to a special school. I'm already are on drugs, and people in the community know that I'm on drugs, and I'm already a notorious liar. Now the evil people in your community can get away with anything because who else in the community is going to believe a word that you say? They can basically do almost anything to you, and nobody's either going to care or nobody's going to trust any word that comes out of your mouth. And it didn't even occur to me until you were just putting those things together. That's how somebody in your circumstances how this can go on for years for somebody in your circumstance, and nobody would believe you.
And fear as well. Fear is a big
Yeah,
factor.
sure.
Fear is a
You
big factor.
You went through some loss while you were still a teenager. You lost some friends to murder and to suicide.
Yeah.
Before you start to get on your feet a little bit, I want to talk about married life for you in just a moment, but let's talk about some of the devastating losses that you went through.
Yeah, so I lost a mate, one of the few mates that I did have that I went to school with. He was stabbed outside a nightclub in the next town over. I lost a really good friend to suicide. He threw himself in front of a train. That was really hard. That was
Wow.
really hard on me. I, I lost people to, at such a young age to addiction, to overdoses. Um,
Yeah. How old were you when you started losing friends to addiction, to murder, to suicide?
18,
Uh huh.
18, 19, so still not very old.
Yeah. And most
Um,
18, 19-year-olds are not equipped to process that kind of grief.
no, no. I was emotionally stunted anyway. I had no emotional intelligence whatsoever. I didn't know how to sort of calm my own mind. I always had these thoughts at 1,000 times a second, and these words would bounce around my head. Um, and I would see these blurred things in front of my face, and it's because my mind, because I have such an affinity for words, it was like I'll look at a wall and I'd want to write on it, and I'd look at the sky and I'd want to paint across it. Um, and that made me feel mental. It made me feel different. And I now know these things, that these blurred things were words. I sometimes see words, I'll see a brick wall and it'll say brick wall across it. I don't know why. Um, but it's the way that my mind works. But the thing that for me that was the most difficult was, I mean, I'm 6'1". I was always skinny, especially when on drugs. But I lived in this bed sit um, in a couple of towns over, which was also a mining town, and on the first and second floor they were bed sits, and then the third floor and fourth floor they were what's called masonettes. So they were flats with stairs in, so they would have a downstairs and upstairs. Um, and the guy upstairs um, was really good friends with my best friend from earlier school, um, Paul. And Paul, by the time he was 15, was 6'9". Um, and you know, so when we reconnected, he was, I guess, 6'9" and 20 odd stone, and then there was Darren, who was 6'4" and 20 odd stone, and there was Lorne, who was like, I guess, 6 foot and like 18, 19 stone. Yeah, all these big guys. And Darren was my first sort of mentor. He was the first one to go, I love your poetry. He taught me how to DJ. He taught me magic. Um, when the first Star Wars came out, not the first Star Wars Episode One. I beg your pardon. When that came out, um, I managed to get a copy on, knockoff VHS as always. Um, and he didn't mind me drinking. He saw that as a lesser evil, but he hated everything else that I was taking. So we would sit there with a whiskey and we'd watch it, and we had these tinfoil hats on with I don't know, a wooden spoon or something as
Yeah.
a
As your
lightsaber.
lightsaber. All right.
And he would just sort of rescue me from the situation, because I was around people that used a lot of drugs, and he didn't like to see that. He was also the first person to kidnap me, lock me in a room, and then sit there with me as I vocally abused him and tried to attack him, as he wipes my brow, as he fed me water for days to get me clean.
Wow.
And uh, he died. He was in a bad accident. He drove what's called a gully sucker, which is these machines that with rolling pads on the bottom that
Uh-huh.
clean the sides of the streets, sidewalks you would
Oh
call
yeah,
them,
okay.
and
Street
yeah,
sweepers is what we call them.
street sweeper, yeah,
Yeah.
gully suckers. That's what they were called when I was growing up. And he was thrown from it on a country road, and it landed on him, and it broke his
Oh my
pelvis,
goodness.
and he survived it. And he was walking within weeks. He was a big, strong man. But then one day he just said, "I'm tired," and went to bed, and never woke up, and passed away of a thrombosis, and that devastated me. That absolutely.
Hey, Jack, I need to jump in for a second and translate the English language for people in North America because you talked about how big, tall, and how strong some of your friends were, but you described them in terms of 18 or 20 stone. And every single person over here on this side of the Atlantic is scratching their head. I know exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about 200, 240-pound guys. I think last time I checked myself, I weigh about 16 stone, maybe 17. Um, so for everybody who heard your language and they're sitting there scratching their head saying, "What did he just say?" I need to translate the English language because, as the great Winston Churchill once said, the difference between the United States and the UK is that we're two countries separated by the same language. We don't
Yes.
use the English language the same way.
No,
Sorry,
that's
I
okay.
jumped in. Hey, let's fast forward to 23. You're starting to turn things around. You're starting to get your life straightened out, trying to get yourself cleaned up. Um, can you describe
Yeah.
that first attempt? And I'm just going to spoil it for
Well,
everybody. Your first attempt to try to get clean and sober.
yeah. So that was I finally got clean and sober in 2014. Um, so yeah, I'll be 10 years clean and sober this year. But I tried everything. My marriage had ended. I was going absolutely mental. I was having flashbacks to childhood. I was doing lots of drugs. Um, I was seeing lots of women at the same time, because I associated that physical aspect with love, or at least liking someone. Um, and yeah, I mean, a few of the women had found out in 2013 that I'd been seeing these people behind their backs. I was making a film that was based on my life with some people from the local university. I lost that in the process. I signed it over, and I was broken. I was absolutely just ready to go. I tried suicide several times. I tried. My ex-wife had said that you can't see your daughter like this. Your daughter can't see you like this, and I'd heard you can't see your daughter. So I tried to punch through her solid oak door. That's not the mind of a
Yeah. No
sane
rational
man.
person thinks that they can punch their way
Um,
through a solid oak door.
and I tried. Believe me, I tried. I punched it for a solid 5 minutes, almost breaking my hand in the
Uh
process.
huh.
But yeah, I was just broken. I was homeless. I was part-time sleeping on the streets and sometimes sleeping in on people's sofas. Towards the end of it, I had a room in the house of a young guy, but he was as mentally broken as I was, and we weren't great together. We were both sort of on drugs together, and it wasn't good. And I'd been going to this food bank on a Friday morning, and it was a food bank coffee morning. So you're talking about actually about probably this time, give it a few days, and probably about this time in 2014. And I went in, and I was just totally just broken, and I was wearing a Doctor Who t-shirt, and I walked in, and I was just greeted with this smile of this woman behind the counter. And she got me a coffee, and she had a baby with her, only not even a month old, I guess. And she was just so nice to me. She treated me like the other people didn't. You know, everybody kept me. I think I had a what's the word? Reputation, let's say. But she spoke to me nicely, and she bought me tobacco, and she took me for a meal. And she was just really nice. And I didn't see her for a while, but I liked her, and I couldn't do what I was doing anymore. I love my daughter to bits, and I wanted to have a relationship with her, and I fought for a relationship with her all the way through, even when I was sick. So I lost my uncle and had to go for a funeral in June, and I guess it was June the 26th, 2014. I'm sat in a crack house. I don't know how you translate that. I don't know if you have crack over
It's
there,
crack
but
house over here too.
yeah,
Yep. That one's universal around the world.
yeah. So I found myself in a crack house, and that was funnily enough, it was kind of a safe space for me. But we have this thing called county lines. London is the main part where the drugs come from, and then the towns around it and the counties around it, then they have bases there. So I was a vulnerable person, trapped in county lines, and I was sat in this crack house. And I said, I can't do this no more. I'm just going to OD. And I had this big, massive pipe. And you're talking about 10 o'clock at night. And before I took a hit, I just closed my eyes and said, God, I can't do this anymore. I don't even know if you exist anymore, but if you do, take my life now. Or take away this hunger, this thirst for drugs. Because I can't live like this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I can't put my daughter through this anymore. I can't put the people that I love through this anymore. So I either want to die or I want the chance to live. And I took an almighty hit of crack cocaine, and I fell asleep. On a high concentrate of methamphetamine, which is pretty miraculous in it.
Yeah, that alone should have killed you. That should have done the job, since you were attempting to OD.
And I fell asleep, and this is what I call when I'm a man of faith. This is what I call when God did his surgery on me, because I woke up and about 4 minutes past 12 on the 27th of June 2014, and I haven't used a day since. I haven't had the will to use.
Wait a second.
That was me.
You just woke up, and from that day forward, not only have you been clean, but you haven't even had the will to use drugs since then?
No. And I've been through some absolutely awful stuff in sobriety, which we'll probably get to in a little while.
Yeah.
But, I've gone through some stuff that people should never go through, and that I would have used that for. But I don't even, I have the odd dream, which is knocks me off a bit. But no,
But it's not 3 liters of white lightning anymore.
Yeah, no, it's. I deal with my mental pain and physical pain with prayer and paracetamol.
I'm listening to your story, and it sounds a lot like a few weeks ago on episode 121, we talked to a U.S. Marine that was blown up really bad, technically lost 3 limbs in combat. came back, started using pills to make the pain go away. And Tommy Parker, the pills took over his life, and he destroyed everything about his life. He he alienated his family, in and out of prison, in and out of rehab, year after year after year. Everything that he attempted to do, it was unsuccessful because pain pills and really hard drugs, in his case, heroin, had control of his life. And then I just heard you say almost to the T what happened to Tommy Parker. Tommy pulls in to a gas station, and there's a girl who looks at him, and instead of seeing this, pathetic drugged out, military veteran, she smiles at him and treats him like a person, kind of like a woman behind the counter at a food bank who smiles at you. And all of a sudden, somebody decides to view you as a real human being instead of just, a washout. And for that was the moment things started to turn around for Tommy. But in Tommy's case, it was a long, tough uphill battle against drugs. I'm blown away when God did surgery on you and you wake up the next day and don't even have the desire to touch him again.
Exactly. And I tried for years and years and years, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
I just could not stop.
Every drug addict I've ever talked to has said the exact same words that you're saying right now. Every one of them.
Yeah. That lady at that food bank, she's now my wife. We've been married 5 years.
All right. What's her name?
And Jo.
Tell Jo she's awesome.
I tell her this on a regular basis.
All right.
And she says she didn't see the person that the other people saw. She saw me for the potential
for
that
who
I have.
who you are, not the drugs that you do.
So I started to get sober, and I was doing really, really well. I was sober, clean, building my life. I kind of accepted God into my life, but wouldn't accept Jesus into my life because I still wanted the option to be a bit naughty.
I'm sorry to laugh at you, but I cannot imagine the millions of people that felt the same way. Like, I'll take a little bit of Jesus, but there's some areas of my life that I know I want to be naughty with, and so I don't want him to have anything to do with those. There are millions of people just like that.
Exactly. And it was going great, and then February 2014 I started to get ill. I developed a cough. I could barely breathe at times, and it tasted like silver in the back of my throat. But I just kind of ignored it and tried to go through life with prayer and paracetamol. I think you call paracetamol Adderall, is it? Yeah. It was just, I was losing weight. And then I guess around about the 9th of March, I went to pick up my daughter from school and bring her back to here. Every single bit of air just came out of my mouth. It was kind of expelled. I couldn't breathe. I had to sit on the floor. My daughter was only about 6 at the time. And I had to get my sort of momentum back. I'd not been eating very well. I didn't want to eat. I felt full all the time, but I was, I guess by that point, about 8 stone. So what? 85, 90 pounds, something like that. And on a night time, I would physically shake that hard that I would almost fall off the bed.
Wow.
And I felt like that for weeks. But I wouldn't go to the doctors. I thought it was just some sort of flu.
You're crazy if you're shaking yourself off the bed and you've got this sensation of silver in the back of your throat. I'm not a medical doctor, but even I can tell you something's not right, man.
Something's not right. But I was stubborn. And then on the Saturday, I take the kids uptown. In our town, we've got a very nice little town, and we go to cafes, and I would get them a milkshake and a bit of cake, and I even managed a bacon sandwich myself. I felt a bit better, but they say, I actually felt great, like during that day. So I thought it was thing, but they say before you die, that's what happens. And
All right,
yeah,
I'm
and
going
then
to
later,
spoil it from the audience. You didn't die, but you came close to it, right?
no, I did die.
You did.
I did die for 4 minutes.
Wow.
Um,
What
so
was it
I,
that you were struggling with?
so I, this Sunday morning, I rang my ex-wife and said, "You're gonna have to come and get our daughter. I need to call an ambulance. I need to go to hospital. I haven't slept all night. I feel like absolute shocking." She said, "Don't do that. I don't want to scare her. I'll come and get you. Give me a couple of hours. I'll come and get you. I'll come and get her. We'll take you to the hospital. You can give her a kiss and a cuddle, and she can see that you're going to be all right." I said, "Fair enough." And I guess I got to the hospital about 4 p.m. By
Uh-huh.
7:30, I was dead.
Wow.
I was shaking so badly. I had tuberculosis, pleurisy, some environmental thing that they hadn't seen for about 30 years. Um, I had a mouth infection within my teeth because my body was so bad. It was going into shutdown. Um, I had this complete and utter sort of mental breakdown. I had type 2 lung failure and stopped breathing, died for 4 minutes. I went to hell. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Some people call me a bit mad, but I went to hell. I felt like months. It wasn't this fiery place full of ashes and embers. It was this dark place that looked very much like this, but darker. Um, the best comparison I can give is between VHS and Blu-ray. I stopped seeing in Blu-ray and started seeing in shady VHS, the bad sort of copies that I used to do. So when I was brought back, I had a mental breakdown. The anti-infection drug that they had me on, I took a instant bad allergic reaction to. Um, Not only was it hallucinogenic, um, I'd got this rash from the bottom of my chin all the way down to the top of my legs. I thought that I was being punished for everything bad that I'd done in the world. I thought that God was punishing me, and this had caused the apocalypse. You're talking 2015. I thought I'd caused the apocalypse because I'd started a strain, a pandemic of this super virulent tuberculosis. Um, and I had this total breakdown. I was attacking people left, right, and centre. I would go mute. I went down to round about 72 pounds, I guess.
Wow.
Um, I
Six
lost,
foot one, 70 pounds, 72 pounds.
yeah. And there are photos out there. I can send that to you. But yeah, I was really, really ill. I lost 50% of my muscle mass. To top it off, I lost my job while I was in there. I'd had a job where I was writing policy. I really enjoyed it. It was great. But the company went bust. I went into administration. But that was a big part of my recovery because I got paid £200 redundancy money. So I'm there. And that was, you're talking over a month that I was really sort of in this hell. I was convinced that they were poisoning me with my own blood. So I wouldn't eat, I wouldn't drink. They wanted to section me while I was in there.
What does that mean when
The
you said they wanted to section you?
So they wanted to section me under the Mental Health
Oh,
Act.
okay. I get it.
And I remember the lead elder of our church, Grantley Watkins, dear man, really good friend of mine, a real spiritual father figure. He came to sit by the side of my bed because they were told they were going to lose me again, to pray for my soul because he didn't want to go to hell.
Yeah.
So I'm in this room, what's called a negative pressure room, which is a room with a door about that thick, really heavy door. The only sort of connection you have with people, they're in pandemic gear. So masks and bibs and hats, and, you know, are full on contagion gear. And what a negative pressure room is, it pulls out all of the bad air in the room and pushes in good air. They moved me from different negative pressure rooms on different floors. They moved me to an end of life ward.
Really? Wow.
And
It was that
yeah,
bad.
it was that bad. And then my ex-wife came steaming in one day, and the kid's dad school photos, and she slammed the school photo on and said, "You need to snap out of this now, because your daughter loves you, and this is killing her." And I had this back in the days of Skype. I had a Skype call with her, and I actually thought that she was laid on her bed, and her mum was stroking her hair. Obviously, she was distressed, but I thought they were using her as a puppet. So this made me worse. And then there'd been this doctor, this young female Asian doctor, that would come in and deal with bits and bobs. And she had a nice tone. I didn't mind her. All the other doctors were stern, but she had a nice tone. And in our hospitals, in our National Health Service, you can wear a cross or you can wear something of faith. You cannot show it to the patients because that is illegal. Now, she had this cross that she would let me see, and I'd see it, and she'd catch me staring at it, and she'd smile. And then when somebody would come in, she'd just put it away and give me a smile and walk away. And she did this a few times. And I felt this thing at the end of my bed, and it felt different. It felt more peaceful than the condemnation that I was suffering.
Yeah.
And I said, who's that at the end of my bed? And I just heard this audible voice saying, "You know who it is?" And I'm like, "Well, what have I got to do?" And he went, "You know what you've got to do." And I went, "I don't know how to do it." He says, "You do. You need to surrender to win." And this is a sentence that's been part of my life for a long time anyway. So I said, "Okay, Jesus, if you exist, if you exist."
Yeah. Notice the if. Go ahead.
"I accept you into my heart. I accept you into my life, because I can't do it on my own anymore."
Yeah. You pretty much demonstrated that over your lifetime, right?
Yep. And that darkness that was before my eyes, like looking into sort of a room at dawn when the light's first coming through, I guess. You know, so it's dark, but not too dark that you can't see the defining features. And it went from that VHS vision to full HD.
Wow.
I was sane. I sat up in my bed, which should have been pretty much impossible, because I refused to eat, and the only drink that they could get in me when I was asleep, so they whack a line in and knock me out, basically just so they could get fluid into me. But I'd woken up, and I sat there, and this nurse came in, Jackie, her name is, really lovely woman, good friend of mine to the day.
All right. Nurse Jackie.
And Nurse Jackie, and she walked in, and she looked at me, and I said, Morning. She's like, morning. It's like 7 o'clock. I'm like, oh, sorry. Could I have a wash, please? I feel dirty. And she said, you're talking. You're not screaming. You're not shouting. You sat up. You're talking. And she went out, and then I heard a scuffle outside, and then
Yeah.
all these doctors walked in and started taking me. And I said, I still had this rash, but it
Uh-huh.
wasn't burning as much. This is the next miracle coming along. And I said, I just want to wash. I feel really, really dirty. I want to wash. And they brought in this bowl with a sponge and a cloth. And I dipped this sponge into the bowl, and I just started to wash myself from top to bottom. And this rash just started to peel away
Wow.
and disappear. And by the time that I'd finished, it was completely gone,
Wow.
leaving these doctors and nurses completely baffled. Now, people say, oh, no, well, that can't possibly happen. Well, I have real people that will attest
Yeah.
to, people that were in that room that day that will attest to the fact that this is what happened. I said I wanted to eat. I'd had this mouth infection where I couldn't eat anything solid. That went instantly. And yeah, they brought me, I said I wanted to eat. They brought me in toast. And I managed that, and they brought me in jelly, and it was a slow,
Yeah. Sure.
it was a slow thing over days, but I started eating again, and because I got made redundant, they had a very nice cafe downstairs in the hospital. And people had started visiting me from the church then as well. They were bringing me sweets and tins of spam. I've got this thing for spam.
All right.
And the nurses were so happy that I was eating that they would cook these tins of spam for
Mm-hmm.
me, so I could snack on them. There's no more heavenly smell
Then some
than
frying spam, right? You're
some
not the only person
spam
that
being
I've
grilled
heard
onto a
say that.
hospital
Yep.
wall. Yeah, and so I started eating again, and the doctor said, "Well, this is a bit strange, but if you get back up to 8 stone, you probably have to translate that for me. But if you get back up to
Once
eight
you get
stone,
back
you
up
can
to
leave."
a relatively human body weight.
Yes, then you can leave. So I took that as a challenge. So I was
You
eating
told
the
them,
sweets.
bring
I was
on the
having,
spam. If that's what it takes for
yeah,
me to leave, then bring on the spam.
yeah. I was eating the sweets. They were bringing me in bottles of Lucozade pink lemonade, which is I still love it to this day. I was eating crisps and everything, and I was having my breakfast, and then an hour later going down for a fried breakfast, then coming back up, just snacking.
You were
Then dinner,
basically eating like a hobbit, is what you're telling me.
I was eating dinner and then having a second dinner an hour later, and then tea, and then I'd leave it a couple of hours after that, and then 7 o'clock every night I would order 2 for 1 pizza, 2 for 1 12-inch pizzas from the local pizza shop, and they did me a special deal. It was $9.99 for two 12-inch pizzas, and I would demolish one to myself, and the nurses would share one.
Wow.
That were working the night shift.
I'm impressed that you can put away an entire pizza by yourself.
And I did, and I was still eating after that up until I went to sleep. And it took around about 3 weeks to get from that 6 stone 6 ounces up to 8 stone, 8 stone 3 it was. And they said that I could go home. I ran out of money. Funnily enough, I ran out of money the night before I was allowed to go
Yeah,
home.
because you spent it all on pizza and spam.
Yeah, and it made me cry because Jackie came in and she went, "Jack, we love you. Your journey has been absolutely amazing. It's been a genuine
Mm-hmm.
pleasure to see how your life has turned around. And we want to thank you for buying us a pizza every night. So tonight it's on us." And she handed me a £10 note, which genuinely made me cry. There was a few times where my ex-wife had brought me KFC.
Mm-hmm.
My wife had brought me chicken and stuff as well. But yeah, so I got out the day after and I started my recovery. And then I decided a few months later that I wanted to get baptized.
Nice.
So I went through the baptism course and we decided that I was going to get baptized. And our church at the time was in a school hall.
Mm-hmm.
And we walked in there for the baptism, and I knew that there were other people getting baptized. And as we walked in, my now wife, my girlfriend at
Joe.
the time, she looked over and she went, "Isn't that your specialist?"
Really?
And I turned around and I looked at him and he said, "So amazing to see you like this. It's so amazing. We thought we were going to lose you. You're walking." And I'm like, "I didn't know that you knew I was being baptized." And he's like, "No, no, no. I'm here to see my son who's getting baptized." And his son was getting baptized at the same time as me. I didn't know that my specialist was part of our sort of church
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
And it was just absolutely amazing. And the church just continued to support us. When I got out, people from the church, they would make our family meals and bring them round, just so we didn't have to. And I started getting better and better and better. I started sort of working to get better. By the time I was 18 months sober, I'd given up on wanting to be an actor. I'd given up on wanting a life in film. I decided that I just wanted a quiet life. And then I had a friend that contacted me who was working as a casting person for a film company in our city. The county that I live in is called Norfolk, and we have two major film studios that are the biggest outside London. And this is when they were first sort of building them, and they're both on former air bases, I might add. And so I got this phone call saying, look, I'd started sharing my story a little bit on Facebook and, showing pictures and how I was. And I'd managed, by then, I guess, I'd got up to about 9-10 stone. And I was just healthier and but still eating crap, really. But
still eating spam. Yep.
yeah, still eating spam, still do to this day.
All right.
But I said, we know your story, but we have this director out here that's making a film about addiction in the 80s. Can you come and talk to her? We'll pay you a little bit for it. Just can you come and talk to her and tell her about your life and addiction and stuff? I'd written a book. I'd written my first book. And that was in the process of being published, A Personal Apocalypse, which is a memoir, a poetic memoir, some of the poetry that I've written through my life, compounded it with some of the stories around that. So that was in the process of being published. The second one was in the process of being written. So I found myself on this airbase in the middle of rural Norfolk, speaking to this director by the name of Joanna Hogg. And she said, we're making this film. It's called The Souvenir. It's starring Tilda Swinton and her daughter in her first sort of big role, and it's got a few big names in it. And it's been funded by Martin Scorsese as a executive producer. And that's all I was told. But I gave her a bit of my story. She said, I would love you to come and, just teach our lead actor about that sort of life. And if you would advise on the film as well, be our on-set advisor. And that was sort of the best few months of my life, really. And it was great. And I got to be on screen opposite Tilda Swinton's daughter, Hannah.
Wow.
In a scene. I got to play a drug addict.
A role that you know well? Yeah.
Yeah, a role that I knew well, and it was quite bizarre helping the sort of on-set, uh, um, wardrobe and things like that. Uh, Having to teach them how to make heroin cookers and things like that. But I guess that was a bit healing. It wasn't really triggering at all. It was just a bit bizarre. And then she said, "I'd like you to come back for part two when we do that," because it was always planned as two parts. And I was like, "Yeah, okay," not expecting anything. And then just over a year later, I found myself working on part two as an advisor, and I met uh, Harris Dickinson, who was part of the film, who's getting quite big now. He was in the last Kingsman film, and he said, I'll keep in touch, and we kept in touch via Twitter, and then last year he contacted me asking me if I would read his script. So I did, and it was good. And then I gave him some advice, and then he said, I'd love it if you would come and just be what you did on the set of a souvenir, but in a bigger sort of capacity. So I was like, yeah, okay, and didn't expect to hear anything. I've got
Uh-huh.
used to people within that industry
Sure.
blowing smoke up your backside. That's just the way it is, and it's not nasty. It's just the way that it happens. Um, but true to his word, I got an email and a text the first Friday back after Christmas, which was so 5th of January, I guess, and saying, yeah, it's now been made, and can you come in June to do what you do? Um, I've worked on several other TV programs and things like that. I played one of your serial killers, John Eric Armstrong, who was a seriously sick individual. That was bizarre. So I played him on Twisted Killers for the Oxygen Network, and that opened up some other sort of things for me. And yeah, I then locked down 2020, no, 2021, second lockdown. Our government never really knew what to do with COVID, but we were locked down for a second time. You're only allowed out for half an hour a day, or if you needed to go to the shop. If you were caught out for too long, you could be arrested and fined. It was also bizarre, but I found myself getting a bit stir crazy and really sort of just not knowing what to do. And then a friend of mine, Jason Edwards, whose job is to be a hostage and barricade negotiator, said to me, "Why don't you start a podcast?" And I said, "I don't think I've got the confidence to do that." And he went, "Well, try." And I went, "I don't think I've got any guests." He says, "Well, I'll be your first guest. I'll talk about narcissists because he's good at that." He wrote a book about narcissists and how to combat that, and that's his speciality. So I interviewed him, and we did it over Facebook Live.
Uh-huh.
Um, this is sort of really before Zoom took off,
Yeah.
and then I spoke to another guy who saw it, who was a world champion, licensed and unlicensed boxer, ex sort of violent villain. Dominic Negus, and I started to, so I interviewed him, and then I interviewed another guy who was a knife crime um, campaigner, and then then I got my first big guest, a guy by the name of Peter Blexley, who's a former undercover policeman for Scotland Yard, who became this television personality. They did this show called Hunted, where they would get normal people and they would have them on the run, and then they would have these people chasing them, and then if they managed to stay on the run for quite a while, that they would then get money. So I interviewed him, and he got really open and honest about his mental health and his career and his addiction, and started talking about some of the work that he does for um, people that don't really have a voice. And somebody in my church came to me and said, "I've got a prophecy for you." And I'm like, "Okay, God wants you to know that you're going to be a voice for the voiceless people." I didn't really understand what that meant. And then a few weeks later, somebody that I didn't know that came to our church, that didn't really know anybody else, came up to me and said, "God just asked me to come up to you, and I don't know what this means, but he wants you to be a voice for the voiceless." And I'm like, "Okay,
Now you're
all
listening,
right,
right?
this, okay, so I don't know what to do. God, what do I need to do?" And then the part of our church, we've got this thing called the School of Supernatural Life, which was born from our lead elder going to the Redding Church in California at Bethel, and they decided that they were going to start this school where they were going to teach Christians that God was this naturally supernatural being that was so supernaturally natural and naturally supernatural, and that we should live this sort of life. So I started on the second year that they did that. And somebody came up to me and went, "You're going to be a voice for the voiceless." And then I really didn't I'm like, okay, so I don't know what to do with this now. I have no idea. I've written the second book by now. I thought that was me being a voice for the voiceless, about escaping human trafficking and things like that, giving a voice to them. So I thought I'd done it. And I would go to church, and people that I didn't know would come up to me and say, "You're going to be a voice for the voiceless." So I just started reaching out to people that I'd sort of gathered on Facebook, that had gathered around, that some had similar stories to me. It was originally called Shed X because it was done from my shed, and
I get it.
Jason and I were both turned down for TED Talks, so it was kind of a little bit of a dig at them, but they
Yeah.
didn't like it, so I had to change it. So in the January after, when I did series 2, it was renamed Live and Undrugged, and I'd never wanted to be a journalist. So I just wanted to be an actor, but I'd fallen into journalism, so I became the accidental
The
journalist,
accidental journalist. Yep.
and that's where it started to take off. And I've interviewed armed robbers to terrorists, convicted terrorists, to traffickers, to people that have been trafficked, alcoholics, addicts, people that have been through SA, DV, all these things, all of survivors. And I learned that there are 3 steps for people like me, 3 modes to living. The first one is victimhood. We're victims of the circumstance. And some people never get out of that, and they stay the victim their whole lives. And then you've got survivorship, which is the next sort of logical step, which is learning to deal with this trauma and learning to deal with this thing. But most people only ever stay there. But what people don't realize is that to thrive is the next logical step. And that's what I started doing. I started to thrive in my home life, in my spiritual life, in my professional life. Started talking to these people. It led me to last year interviewing a British pop star by the name of Chesney Hawkes. I also interviewed one of the Darman actresses, Catherine Norland, who was really nice.
All right.
And my guests just started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it became this way for people to come and share their experience, strength, and hope.
Yeah.
But I'd started feeling that I was losing some of my voice, and then I got the opportunity to go and speak on a podcast, somebody else's podcast, and then I got asked again, and again and again and again.
And
And
that's
you
why
know,
you're on this podcast,
that's
because
why I'm on this
yeah,
one.
sure.
I genuinely believe that if we've been through a certain way of life, then it's our duty to educate others, and that's what I do. I live to educate. I live to um, you know, help people find their true potential. I found recovery through creativity, and I try to teach people to do the same, and that's how I find myself really sort of sat here.
Yeah. Jack, it does sound like you've become a voice to the voiceless. A few minutes ago, when you were talking, I wrote down a phrase. I think I heard you correctly. And if I did, I want you to take just a moment to explain this phrase. Did you say surrender to win is the way that you try to live your life? Is that right?
Yes.
Would you explain
Now,
what that means?
okay, so most people see surrendering as a white flag to give up.
It's a way to lose, right?
Yeah. However, that's not what surrender means. Now, I know that I would not have a life were it not for my relationship with God. Um, None of this would be here. And if you're looking from a military point of view, when the threat to your squadron is so great that you're going to lose every last man, what do? Do you lose the last man, or do you surrender, take a step back,
Regroup and fight again?
retreat, regroup, and fight again?
Yeah.
Well, that's what you do. That's what the army do. That's what the navy. That's what every armed force does. When threat to life is so bad, you need to surrender to win. So to surrender my will and my life over the care of God as I understand Him. It's not always easy
Of
because
course
I have
not.
free
Yeah.
will.
Sure.
I have my own will. I've had some real trauma in my um, sort of life
Definitely.
that I've tried to deal with. I've had some trauma in sobriety.
Yeah.
You know, I'd found my real mum. I had a bit of a relationship with her, but kept her at a distance. I lost her to cancer in 2017, and
Mm-hmm.
then 3 months later, I lost my niece, um, a few days old,
Hmm.
because her father lost his temper and shook her and beat her to death.
Oh my
He
goodness.
was then given a life sentence with a minimum of 10 years, and after serving less than a year, he was murdered by his cellmate.
Hmm.
So we never got answers. So I've been through some real sort of even
Yeah.
dark times within sobriety, and I had to say to God, God, why
Yeah.
this? Why my family? Why this? And I didn't understand, and then it took a year for the funeral. And one of the elders from our church, he took me home. I didn't want to go home on my own. It's about 200, 300 miles away. He took me home. He paid for the hotel the night before and came to the funeral with me. And after the funeral, I'm stood outside. And this is in the days when I smoked cigarettes. And I lit a cigarette after the funeral. I went outside, lit a cigarette, and I didn't want to cry in front of my family. And so I just wanted to calm down. And then his mum walked up to me and she threw her arms around me and said, "Thanks for coming. It means a lot."
Wow.
And I broke. I broke really, really hard. And I began to cry. I began to just go red. And Chris said,
Mm-hmm.
"What's going on?" Gets me in the car. And I just burst with just all this emotion. And
Yeah.
I just start crying. And in my head, I'm going, "God, why do you allow this? Why did you allow this? Why did you allow this?" And I just felt this peace come over me. And it's a peace that you only get with sudden pain. Like when you're so angry and you're raging and you punch something and you break a bone, or you hurt yourself badly, or you're raging and you kick a table by accident, and you know there's a quietness that comes. It's when your body goes into that shock. There's a quietness, a calmness that comes, and that's what came. And he said, "You got to forgive him, not for him, not for his mum, not for his dad, not for anybody else, but you've got to forgive him for you, because if you don't, this is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's not going to happen. It's going to kill you. You're going to lose everything that you've got.
Yeah.
You're going to lose your family. You're going to lose all the hard work that you've done. You need to forgive him." And Chris turned to me and said, "Well, what's going on?" I said, "God told me that I need to forgive him," which then started him off crying. And he's a stoic man, really stoic man.
Mm-hmm.
And we just prayed. Now, my family aren't Christian. I've got part of my family a Muslim.
Uh-huh.
Multi-faith in my family. But yeah, we prayed in this car park, and it was a long few days, and I knew that I had to surrender my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him, because I can't do this on my own, and I needed to get better, and I needed to heal. And then when I forgave him, still working, I'm now working at the school, and we start worship before the lessons and stuff like that, and we have about an hour worship, and laying on the floor, bawling my eyes out, and I knew I had to forgive myself for things, and I had to forgive my abusers, and I started to heal. And then I started to work within networks that deal with sort of recovery and healing, and I started to get better. And when I did, I started to live, and I found my identity. I never knew who I was. I never quite found out who I was. And then when I found Christ, he taught me what my identity is. He taught me who who I am.
Yeah.
And who I'm meant to be.
Right.
And that's where I am right now, just sort of working to educate, to facilitate, to teach, to do whatever I can to just be better.
Yeah. You really did surrender, and that's when things started to turn around for you. I'm going to wrap this episode up by saying you took us full circle, man. You were a kid making movies, literally pirating movies with your camcorder in a movie theater. And then your life goes through incredible ups and downs. And then you end up actually making movies for real, like the movie The Souvenir. If people want to find that movie in the States, is it available on streaming out there somewhere?
It might be on Netflix. It's on Netflix in the UK. Okay. The first one is, at least.
Part one is on Netflix in the UK. It's called The Souvenir, right?
The Souvenir Part 1, yeah. Part 2, The Souvenir Part 2 is out there. I would imagine it's probably on Prime.
Yeah.
To buy or to rent.
All right.
Yeah.
And your book, A Personal Apocalypse, is that available out there?
Yeah, so that's available from my website. It's available from Amazon. It's on Amazon along with my second book, Between the Streetlights and Red Lights. There's also a audio book coming from the first one that we professionally produced, and which was done during lockdown and by a friend of mine who was struggling for work, but we never quite got it out there. And I'm doing a sort of a special edition of A Personal Apocalypse as well right now, where I'm adding more stories, more poetry, some of the things that I've learned over time, over this past 10 years. So you can find it on Amazon, or you can find it on my website, which is jwgreg.wordpress.com, and it's on there. And you can also find Live and Undrugged on there under the tabs. You can even find ShedX on there, and you can find some of the face stuff that I'm now doing as well.
We're going to put links to all of this. If you're driving right now and listening to this, just look at the notes. We'll put links to all of this, and including the Accidental Journalist and the Live and Undrugged podcast. Man, you really are unbeatable. You've been through it all. And after surrendering and God turning your life around, you've demonstrated what it looks like to thrive now. And I just want to say thanks, Jack, for sharing your story with us, man.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Cheers.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.